Okay, so I think we've clearly established that these are areas of challenges for children with profound intellectual multiple disabilities, and that these areas are definitely impacted for your children and children with related social communicative difficulties. I also love this quote from Roz, again, a neurodiverse woman, who just says you have to have high expectations for individuals with ASD, but with appropriate and, when necessary, high levels of support. And that's what SCERTS really strives to do, right? We don't put any limits on where we think somebody can go in terms of their learning. We want to have high expectations, but we want to meet them at their developmental level. And when we meet them at their developmental level, we want to put all the supports in place that will help move them forward.
In case that many of our listeners are not even familiar with SCERTS, much less the verb certified.
It's a great verb, Barry. I use it all the time. So for those of you who don't know, SCERTS is an educational model for autistic individuals, and we say it's a lifespan model, and Barry is the first author of the model. I'm one of the junior authors of the model. But when it focuses on supporting individuals in areas where they need support in ways that are authentic to who they are to help them navigate their day. So helping an individual develop social communication abilities, the how and the why of communication, and emotional regulation. So how they're able to regulate their own energy, arousal, emotional state on their own, or in the context of a relationship with somebody else, but it's done in a relational developmental model way. So it's all about the partners being part of that equation and supporting the individual in ways that are meaningful and authentic.
SCERTS is a very complex model. So let me just give you what the acronym stands for, because you can't have a model of education in special education without having an acronym. Like, it's a silly joke, but it's actually true. Like, think about every model of education you know, and they all have acronyms, and we are no exception. So SCERTS stands for social communication, emotional regulation, and transactional support. So those are the three primary domains of the model. So when we're thinking about intervention, we're thinking about educating children on the autism spectrum or who have related social communicative difficulties, these are kind of what we hold up as our pillars and our top priorities in educating children, because this is typically what qualifies them for special education in the first place. So this is the foundation that we feel that is really necessary. So obviously social communication makes a lot of sense if we're talking about autism and related disabilities. We know it's a qualifying component in terms of diagnostic qualification, right? Then there's the emotional regulation side, which is actually the part that I was brought into the model to flesh out initially when we were writing the model, which is really kind of how available for learning is it somebody? How regulated are they? How able are they to attend? Where's their arousal level? Like, is it a good match for the social and physical environment? And then those two areas, the social communication and emotional regulation, are the areas that we seek to facilitate development within the children, within the students, within the individuals in our lives who have these learning challenges. Okay, so that's where we scaffold development within the individual. The transactional support side of the model, which we know sounds a little bit jargony, and it's from the developmental literature, is the part of the model which really fully embraces that learning is a two-way street. So this is a partnership, and transactional support is how we change our interactions and the learning supports that we put in place to scaffold that development. So the first two components, social communication and emotional regulation, are things that we're looking to facilitate development within the child. And the transactional support piece of the model is, how are we going to do that? What's our responsibilities as partners? If we want to see change in the child, in the students, in the individuals that we care about, we have to be willing to change too. So SCERTS really is a learning partnership model. Change in the child, change in the partners creates this kind of needed change overall.
In terms of regulation, I find the window of tolerance model very helpful. So you see here, this is the regulated state within the window of tolerance. when one feels grounded, flexible, open, curious, present, able to emotionally self-regulate, one also feels creative and hopeful, cheerful. However, when you feel overwhelmed, then very quickly you can fall out of your window of tolerance, and this will result either in the fight, flight response or the freeze.
Those who have experienced trauma often have difficulty regulating their emotions. So how can we help them learn how to self-regulate? Well, the first thing we need to think about is their window of tolerance, because if they're outside that window, it can be difficult for them to make progress in their sessions with us.
When I think about self-regulation, I really think about that optimum window of tolerance, right? That in a non-traumatized client with good self-regulation skills is really quite wide. So, they have a broad window of tolerance. And of course, you have to be in that window of tolerance to be able to think clearly, to have good relationships, to plan for the future. If you're outside that optimum window of tolerance, all those abilities, I think, are very much affected. And so when we think about our traumatized clients who have great difficulties with self-regulation, I always think of that optimum window of tolerance shrinking, right? So it's very narrow, and usually they're either too hyper-aroused or too hypo-aroused, which prevents them from thinking clearly, of being involved in stable relationships, prevents them from being really able to function at work, because they're constantly juggling either hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused states. So I think self-regulation is all about being in that optimum window of tolerance and widening that optimum window of tolerance through emotional awareness, through learning how to regulate your emotions, and through really coming into your body and feeling safe in your body.
So when we talk about SCERTS, and we talk about this idea of social communication, emotional regulation, and transactional support, those three domains are geared at supporting development in what we consider social communicative competence. So, and that's our goal. Our goal is social communicative competence within this model, because we know that social communicative competence plays a major role in our ability and our success to form relationships and to function throughout our lives, right? So to engage in the activities that we enjoy, to have success in interactions with other people, and build relationships, and basically navigate our communities in ways that are really fulfilling to us. It really relates to quality of life, right? It's how connected can you be to other people? And so we know when we're working with children with autism and related social communicative disabilities like Phelan McDermott, we know their social communicative competence is compromised by the nature of the challenges that they face. So this is where we want to intervene, because what we're really after is good quality of life for the children and the individuals that we care about with these diagnoses. So our goal then is to figure out what areas support the development of social communicative competence, right? So if that's a goal, and we know that we have a population of individuals that we care about who are challenged in this area, it's our job as educators, as family members, as partners to figure out what do we have to support to develop growth in those areas. And there's been several meta-analyses that have been done to date looking at educational methodology that talk about our primary objectives. If our goal is social communicative competence, is working towards gains in spontaneous communication. So having an individual at whatever developmental level they are at be able to initiate communication with other people for a variety of reasons, again, using whatever means that they have available to them in a lot of different settings. That's what we're after, right? So we're after true initiation for a variety of reasons with a variety of people in a variety of settings. If we've got that, we're well on our way to social communicative competence, because they're connecting to other people and they're expressing their own wants, needs, and hopefully interests as well. The second part that the meta-analysis tell us when we think about social communicative competence is that we want to move towards generalization of gains within functional activities. So what does that mean? That means it's not just simply teaching a student or a child to do something in one setting with one person. It's helping them be able to use that skill that they're learning in a variety of different environments. Again, different people, different activities. But that's the growth and development that we're after, right? That's where we know that the individual or the child truly has the skill. And it's not just something that they're trained to do, that they can do when the conditions are just right, but that we're really working towards this developmental growth for the individual. So spontaneous communication and looking at gains across functional activities. And the other piece that the meta-analyses are very clear on is that our programs have to not only support the children with the special needs, but they also have to support the partners, right? You have to be well regulated to be able to use your skills in different settings. And the transactional support piece, the part that we're part of the solution as well as part of the problem that we're willing to change as well, layers on this idea that we need to support partners as well as children on the spectrum or with related needs. So again, if we want to understand how social communicative competence and these three domains go together, I just want to give you a little bit of a layman's terminology in terms of the background of them. So we think about the dimensions, and of course, social communication makes a lot of sense, right? So we know that in general, individuals who are able to display a greater capacity to both initiate and follow conversational focus are more competent as social communicators. And we know that children and individuals with Phelan-McDermott syndrome are challenged in initiating and following in communication. So we're going to think about bolstering both of those abilities for the children and the students in your lives. And when we think about this, we talk about initiating and following. I mean, if you just think about it in daily life, even outside of the context of Phelan-McDermott or disability, you can think about a conversation that feels really good to you. Like you're in that conversation and there's a flow and a back and forth, right? And then you can also think about those conversations where you're initiating all the time and no one's responding to you. Like any of you who have teenage boys in your homes, right? And you're trying to find out how their day went and you're asking questions of them and they're not coming back and giving you any information at all, right? That's not a really solid communicative exchange. And then the flip side, right, is the person who initiates all the time and you can't get a word in edgewise, right? And we've all had those phone conversations with friends where we feel like we could put the phone down and walk away and they would not know we were gone. Right? That also doesn't feel like a good conversation. It really is this back and forth in the flow. We really want to think about what does that back and forth look like? And we need to think about it in the context of the developmental level of the children and the individuals in our lives. But it's still that connectedness to another person and that ability to maintain connection that allows us to have this social communicative competence or this base for social communicative competence. So I mentioned the second part of the model, which we tell you is really critical for social communicative competence, is emotional regulation. But emotional regulation, a lot of times people go, how is that related to social communicative competence? Obviously, initiating and following, sophistication of language, all of those pieces make sense. But how does emotional regulation relate? Emotional regulation is critically related to social communicative competence. And there's vast amounts of research that are very clear and helping us understand that individuals who have a better ability to kind of monitor their own physiological state, their arousal state, and modulate that in a way to be connected to their environment are much more able to maintain their social engagement, problem solve, and communicate effectively. And I'm sure some of you are sitting there going, we know that's a real challenge for our children and for the people in our lives. Talk about part of it is self-regulation, what they can do for themselves, and then part of it's mutual regulation. How do we support them in this area? But one of the things that I love to do at this point is really point out how emotional regulation can undermine social communicative competence really well. I love this cartoon. So Gary Larson, Far Side cartoon, he captures beautifully the impact of regulation on communication. So Tarzan's getting ready to go on a blind date with Jane, and he's swinging and he's getting closer to her. And he's really got some beautiful language here, right? So he's like, okay, how do you do? My name is Tarzan. I believe you're known as Jane. And he's getting even closer. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, and you. Like, we've got perspective taking. We've got language at about 4.5 years developmental level. He's getting closer to her. As he's getting closer to her, we know getting closer to a blind date, arousal level starts to go up. So he's starting to get more anxious. You must be Jane. I'm Tarzan. It's a pleasure to meet you. His developmental language level's gone down to about a 3-year-old now. And it's a pleasure to meet you as echolalia. Like, no one has ever said that as a generative statement in their lives, ever. So we've got borrowed speech and we've got significant reduction in sophistication, right? He sees her, he stops swinging. Now, as an OT and someone who's really concerned with regulation, that's a problem that he stopped swinging. However, he stops swinging, his arousal level goes up because he sees her. We get this quick spike. We get me, Tarzan, you, Jane. Damn. So we're at an 18-month-old developmental level in 5 frames of a cartoon, right? So we go from this really sophisticated ability to have perspective taking, conversational, to being able to put 2 words together. And the thing that I like to point out in this cartoon is we have all had Tarzan moments. We have all been in situations where we've practiced saying something like, we're going to go into our boss and we're going to ask for a day off and this is how we're going to do it. And we think we're so ready and we get in there and it does not go according to plan. And we leave going, oh, if I'd only said it this way, right? Or if you've ever been pulled over by a police officer and you go from a fairly articulate person to somebody who can't get 2 words together. This happens all the time. For our children who have regulatory challenges because of their neurological differences, like your kiddos with Phelan-McDermott, because of the neurological underlying differences, they're at greater risk for dysregulation. So these moments happen much more frequently. And this is why we can see, you know, our students and our kids that we care so much about, you know, be able to communicate in their most sophisticated way that they have one day, and then, you know, the next day not be able to do it at all. And we sit there and we go, whoa, what just happened? And it's most likely it's a Tarzan moment. It's not that they've lost that skill. It's not that they're not able to do it. And it's not that they're holding out on us in any way. It's that something's probably off in terms of their regulation, their ability to focus their attention and participate in the environment in the way that allows them to be fully actively engaged. So this component of regulation is really important in terms of this idea of social communicative competence that we're talking about within the model, and we hold up. So when we talk about SCERTS, we're going to talk about how do we develop goals in social communication and how do we develop goals in regulation. And oftentimes, how do those 2 things mesh together? How do I support regulation so they can develop the communication skills? How do I support regulation so they can initiate more frequently? That's kind of the partnership that we really want to be thinking about as we're thinking about this model. Just very quickly, in terms of emotional regulation, it is important to say within the context of our model that all behavior serves a function. So when we look at a child or a student or individual who's having challenging behavior, we are constantly trying to figure out what that is. And not just from the perspective of kind of a traditional FBA, you know, those 5 categories. We think really deeply about how and why somebody's engaging in a behavior and how that relates to communication and what it is in the context of regulation and those types of things. So again, hopefully we'll dive into that a little bit more the next time we have a chance to meet up. I do love this quote. This is a woman with autism. And I just think it so beautifully captures what we need to think about for our individuals in our lives who are more challenged in terms of communication and have regulatory challenges. You know, so oftentimes people are so focused on the behavior and wanting to change the behavior. And Roz I think she captures it beautifully. She says this behavior is the only issue. This would be no different than naughty child syndrome. And she goes on to say, this really isn't about the behavior at all. The behavior is just a manifestation of my underlying neurological differences. The behavior itself may be challenging, but the root of it is really in the neurological differences and the mismatch between what's happening in the environment and how they're processing it and able to feel comfortable and engaged in that environment. So I love listening to individuals who are neurodiverse because they give us such great insight and make us stop and think, which I think is fantastic.
To me, the outside world is a totally incomprehensible mayhem which terrifies me. Quote by Rose Blackburn. My primary emotion is and has always been fear. Quote by Temple Grandin.
The transactional support slide, I said the first two abilities, social communication and emotional regulation, are what we're really looking to foster within the child, and that's what we are after for sure. So what we want to do in terms of social communication and emotional regulation is develop those foundations which relate to social communicative competence, but we can't do it without transactional support because you can't be a competent social communicator without a partner. So this is where the partner comes in. You might have this whole kind of ease and understanding and go, I know exactly what they mean when they do that. But the new school teacher at the new school is totally baffled and not responsive to your child when they do that thing, right? And that's why we try to have all those meetings up front and develop care plans and everything, and try to capture as much of an IEP as possible. But there's something about the relationship, the ease, the trust, and you being mom, dad, grandma, brother, sister, that there's that relationship that allows kind of this known entity for communication, which can be so hard for somebody new. The goal within SCERTS is to share that magic that you have, right? So how did you develop that understanding? How do you share that understanding of your child's communication? How do you help this other person become a predictable, trustworthy communicator for your child, right? Because that's what we're after. We're after your child recognizing, understanding, and knowing that this other person that's going to interact with them, this communicative partner, is going to be predictable, is going to be responsive, is going to honor their communication attempts. Because when your children know people are going to do that, that's when they're much more likely to feel better regulated and initiate more frequently, which we said we're after. So this transactional support side becomes really important. And it's really helping partners be understanding so that they really can be responsive and make your children feel like they're effective and efficient communicators, like really solid, that they've got it down. So that is one of the pieces that we're definitely after.